Hey everybody, I hope you guys are all healthy and safe. So smartphone prices have been increasing steadily for the past few years, but in 2020 it jumped up even higher than usual because smartphone brands, virtually all of them, have decided that they're going to add a new ultra premium model of smartphones. You know how in the past there used to be a standard phone like a S10 and then an S10 Plus, or a Huawei P30 and a P30 Pro, and that would be it. But then this year, smartphone brands added a third higher tier. Now we don't just have the S20 and the S20 Plus, we also have the S20 Ultra. We don't just have the P40 and the P40 Pro, we have the P40 Pro Plus. And every brand's been doing it. And even though I think the highest tier phones are indeed very, very good, they've bumped up prices to well over $1,000. We're talking about like $1,300 or even $1,500 US dollars. I know that to a lot of average consumers, that's just way too damn much money to pay for a phone. So Samsung has heard your complaints, that's why they have launched this. This is the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE. So FE stands for Fan Edition. So basically, in a nutshell, this is a mid-tier Samsung phone, but unlike previous mid-tier phones that would give you kind of mediocre components all around, Samsung would give you tip-top flagship components in some crucial areas. So for example, this display is a 6.5-inch OLED panel, Samsung AMOLED, and it refreshes at 120 Hz, so it is super smooth all around, buttery smooth. You have a Snapdragon 865 in here, and that was the most powerful Android chip that we could get all the way up until like a month ago, the 865 Plus. But even then, the 865 Plus and the 865, very little difference. So this is basically as good a chip as you're gonna get in Android. You also have IP68 water and dust resistance, which is pretty cool because usually you don't get that IP68 rating in phones that aren't flagship quality. And finally, you have a triple camera system right here that covers the usual standard, ultra wide, telephoto focal length. So in terms of all the stuff that maybe a casual smartphone users would need, processing power, camera, and also just the screen, like how it looks and everything, I think the S20 FE delivers on all three of these counts, and they're basically almost tip-top flagship level. But obviously Samsung had to compromise a little bit in hardware and components to meet that $700 price point, because otherwise, you know, how else could Samsung sell this for like $600 cheaper than the S20 Ultra? So first thing you notice is that the bezels around the screens are slightly thicker, just by a hair, more than the bezels around the Note 20 Ultra. Now, the fact that the Note 20 Ultra has a curved display probably adds to the illusion of slim bezels, but you know, if you handle a lot of top-tier flagship phones, you can see it. Now, the back of this phone, it's also made of plastic. It definitely does not feel as nice as the premium finishes we've seen on many backs of phone, like the Gorilla Glass in the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra or the ceramic back of a Huawei P40 Pro Plus. The screen resolution is also a little bit lower. This panel is just 1080 by 2400, so it's not quite Quad HD resolution, but this is actually one area where I don't think it matters that much. I think anything north of 1080p is sharp enough for the human eye if you're just talking about a screen that's under like 7-8 inches. But another compromise that I actually kind of find annoying with this phone is the haptic engine in the S20 FE is kind of mushy. The haptic engine on a S20 Ultra or Note 20 Ultra is excellent. When you're typing on those phones, you feel as if each keys you're pressing is bouncing back at your finger. There's a tactile feeling to it that you don't get with the haptic engine here. It's very mushy all around. And finally, the base storage of the SC is also a little bit lower. The $700 price point that I mentioned, you're only getting 128 gigs of internal storage with 6 gigs of RAM. So 6 gigs of RAM in 2020 is kind of low. But the good news is, at least the internal storage in here, it's the UFS 3.1, which is really the fastest internal storage tech around in Android, and it's much faster than 2.1. Overall, I'm not seeing any performance issues. Everything has been loading pretty fast. I would say this is just about flagship level in terms of performance. Now taking a look at the camera system, so you have a 12 megapixel ultra wide angle camera up top. That's almost the same lens as the one seen in the Note 20 Ultra, except the image sensor in here, it's a little bit smaller, so you will see some difference, and a night shot when you're taking ultra wide angle photos, there's definitely more noise in this. The main camera in the middle is a 12 megapixel sensor, so that's, you know, at least on paper, a big drop from the 108 megapixel sensor used in the S20 and the Note 20 Ultra. But I actually don't think it's that big of a drop off in real life, but I'll tell you more about that later. And down here, it's an 8 megapixel telephoto zoom lens. So this is another drop off from the periscope zoom lens seen in the Note 20 Ultra or the S20 Ultra. So that means you cannot pull off 5x lossless optical zoom, and you cannot zoom all the way up to 50x. On this phone, I would say lossless zoom goes up to 3x. Anything beyond 3x is digital crop. But you can go up to 10x and still look kind of respectable. Anything above 10 though, then it looks a little bit janky. But if you really want to push it, this phone can do digital zoom up to 30x. Although at 30x, you know, you're just not getting a clean shot. Alright, so let's go back to the main camera. So the reason I say that the 12 megapixel camera here is not a huge downgrade from the 108 megapixel seen in the Note S20 Ultra, it's because I'm not a huge fan of that 108 megapixel sensor, especially on the S20 Ultra. You'll probably remember if you watch my videos or if you've read other reviews, the 108 megapixel sensor, because it has such a large image sensor, the field of focus is actually very narrow. So on the S20 Ultra, that phone had a lot of auto focusing issues. So it's kind of like Samsung got a little bit too ambitious and pushed for too many pixels, too large a sensor, and then it didn't fine-tune the software enough to fix autofocus. And ironically, Xiaomi actually does a better job. Xiaomi's 108 sensor consistently focuses better than Samsung's 108 sensor. But anyway, so the fact that this 12 megapixel sensor is a little bit more modest, it's not Samsung aiming so high. In return, ironically, you actually have better focusing on this camera. And for the most part, I think photos captured with the main camera during the day looks great, and at night it's pretty solid too. It's not the best camera around, but to be honest, I wouldn't say the S20 or the Note 20 Ultra are the best cameras around too. But overall, just looking at photo and video samples here, I don't think most average consumers will have any complaints at all. This is still a very capable camera system, although, you know, by my super high standards, I would not say this is an amazing camera. But to be honest, the Galaxy S20 FE is not meant for someone like me, because I am a gadget geek and a tech enthusiast. Even before I started reviewing tech professionally for a living, I was someone who would spend money buying the most powerful phone anyway. I mean, I paid for the Microsoft Duo, $1,300 US, even though the software on this thing is freaking terrible. But I paid for it anyway because I'm a gadget geek and I'm really excited by this really interesting form factor. I just want to use the best and latest what's possible. But to most average consumers, they don't need all that. For example, most people put a case on their phones, so it doesn't really matter whether this back is plastic or glass or gold or metal or vibranium or diamond, whatever the heck it is, it doesn't matter. You're putting a case on that anyway. Likewise with this camera, you know, I'm gonna complain that, oh, you can't zoom beyond 10x and have a clean shot. Oh, you can't take pictures in really dark conditions with this camera. It's just not as good as the Huawei P40 Pro Plus, but most average consumers do not need to take photos in really dark conditions, or they don't need to zoom 20x. And that's kind of the whole point with the S20 FE. It's a phone that, for average consumers, it's gonna be more than good enough for them. Like, Samsung focus on the important, immediately noticeable things like a screen. You know, even the average consumers will be able to tell the screen is not good, right? So Samsung is giving you a Super AMOLED panel that gets very punchy, very vivid with 120 Hz refresh rate. So this is, you know, a great screen no matter who you are. And likewise, you're still getting stereo speakers. So unless, you know, you're very hard of hearing, you're gonna be able to hear the difference between this and a budget phone.
What is the time that we spend as a trainee? I was 14.
So you have stereo speakers, and the processor Snapdragon 865, you can handle any game, any app on this without any issues. So ultimately, for 700 bucks, this phone is a great deal for Samsung fans or people who were interested in buying a Note 20 Ultra or S20 Ultra but just cannot stomach paying $1,300. Now you notice that this is like the third or fourth time I've said for Samsung fans. That's because if you're open to buying something outside of Samsung, let's say if you live in Hong Kong and you're okay using Chinese brands, there are a lot of phones at the $700 price range or less that will give you roughly the same kind of impressive specs. For example, the Xiaomi Mi 10 Ultra, it's about $700. You're getting a 120Hz OLED panel, you're getting a Snapdragon 865. So basically same screen, same performance, but that phone has a much better camera system than this phone, has a much better haptic engine too. If you live in Asia and you're open to buying Chinese brands, then this is just one of many good values out there. But if you live in the US or if you live in Korea where Chinese phones aren't on sale officially, or you're just a fan of Samsung, or if you don't trust Chinese brands, you want to use a Korean brand, then the S20 FE is probably the best value of the year along with the Google Pixel 5. So anyway, that's about it for this review. It's not as long and in-depth as usual because overall performance is very similar to any other Samsung phone that I've tested lately. That's it for this review. I have a lot more content coming out. It's a very busy week, so I'm gonna get the iPhone 12 pretty soon and then the Huawei Mate 40 Pro too. I don't know when I'm getting that, but it's coming. So I'm gonna be among one of the first to have the iPhone 12 and the Huawei Mate 40 Pro and a bunch of other stuff. So if you're interested in keeping up to date with all the latest gadgets and smartphones, please consider subscribing to my channel or follow me on Instagram at Ben's Gadget Reviews. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching.